Move over Nintendo, this here is the original Game Boy. It's Gakken TV Boy on NES Works Gaiden. Epoch wasn't the only also-ran company out there swinging for the fences during the early days of the Japanese console industry. As Nintendo and Sega emerged into the global market as survivors, they left plenty of competitors reeling in their wake, including companies and consoles that had no business even trying, such as Gakken and its TV Boy. Granted, Gakken's abortive entree into the early console market shouldn't come as a total surprise. Although a book publishing company specializing in educational and reference publications seems an unlikely aspirant in early console gaming, you have to remember that any company with even the tiniest stake in electronics scrambled to become more involved in video games back in the late 70s and early 80s. The Invader's boom hit Japan exactly like Pong Mania in the States, inspiring corporations who had absolutely no business making video games to throw their hat into the ring. And Gakken at least had some experience on this front. The company had seen success with Denshi blocks, a sort of updated take on amateur electronics kits of the 1970s, like Heath kits, allowing children to program simplistic devices by connecting modular electronic cubes which would perform different functions. From there, Gakken had jumped into self-contained LCD and VFD video game devices, including an official Dig Dug tabletop and a VFD Pac-Man clone so convincing that Coleco imported it into the US and stuck the actual Pac-Man license on it. So the TV Boy didn't come entirely from left field. However, the system is about as bizarre as you can imagine a console being. Now granted, the video game interfaces and ergonomics we take for granted today had yet to be locked down or clearly defined when the TV Boy debuted back in October 1983. Nevertheless, you have to wonder exactly what Gakken had in mind when they created this thing, which looks for all the world like a desk phone built into the helm controls of the Starship Enterprise. If someone were to edit the TV Boy into one of those bizarre failed controller concepts Nintendo likes to show off for the Wii, no one would even blink. Like the original cassette Vision and the self-contained consoles of the 70s, think the Telstar Arcade. The TV Boy consists of a single unit with controls integrated right into the hardware. To its credit, Gakken made the thing light and compact, taking up very little space in the living room. But that's about where the good choices end. The TV Boy's primary interface consists of a single 4-way joystick that resembles a large handle, not unlike the gearshift lever of Sega's racing controllers for the SG-1000. The T-shaped handle sits mounted in a rounded socket, and most games use the button integrated into the thumb grip of the handle as their action button. That's not always the case, however, and the system does include a second button, which is mounted into the top of the system's second handle. The left hand bar functions strictly as a grip for holding the console secure, because the combination of lightweight console and large integrated lever requires a hand to secure the system during play and provide sufficient leverage for your commands to register without the console flopping around. The T-handle seems to have a fairly fragile internal design, and all 3 samples I've tested of the TV Boy require some genuine elbow grease in order to make inputs register correctly. I have to assume that the systems weren't quite so fussy about accepting control inputs back when they were brand new, but in any case, the flimsy, almost toy-like build of the system demands an offhand grip. The lightweight feel and brittle control connectors reflect Gakken's central creative strategy for the TV Boy, to offer the most affordable console possible. The system sold originally for 8,800 yen, just slightly more than half the cost of the Famicom, and the games retailed for 3,800 yen, making the whole setup cheaper than anything else on the market at the time, save for the budget-priced Cassette Vision Jr. Perhaps not surprisingly, Gakken constructed the hardware around a similar concept to the Cassette Vision. That is to say, the console itself largely consisted of the power supply, graphics chip and TV connection, and controls. The console lacks an integrated processor chip, instead tucking that tech into the individual cartridges. The only real difference in the two consoles' design, besides the absolute weirdness of the TV Boy's construction, came in terms of the RAM, which lived inside the TV Boy rather than inside the game cartridges as with Cassette Vision. The frugality of the TV Boy's design also extends to its technology, which was downright archaic by late 1983. The Motorola graphics chip was more or less identical to the VDP chip found in the TRS-80 CoCo, a puny budget-priced computer from more than 3 years earlier. And in fact, the overall feel of the TV Boy, including startup and menu selection screens, have the vibe of a low-cost home computer from the late 70s or early 80s. I suppose building around a home computer spec wouldn't have been the worst choice for creating a console in 1983, but Gakken had no ambitions to use the TV Boy as a Trojan horse for sneaking a modular computer system into homes, despite the fact that such an approach would have been perfectly in keeping with the Denshi block legacy. Instead, this simply allowed Gakken to work with common parts, including the in-cart CPUs, which they could source cheaply due to the massive scale at which Motorola manufactured them. This made for a decidedly underwhelming device in terms of graphics. Offering only half the SG-1000's 256 by 192 pixel resolution, which in turn means it only had about a third of the graphical resolution of the Famicom, the TV Boy had command of a whopping 9-color palette, though it could only display 4 at a time. Its audio capabilities amounted to simple bleeps and shrieks, and its games were limited to the simple 4-way inputs of the control yoke. Perhaps not surprisingly, the TV Boy was not long for this world. It shipped in October 1983 and disappeared soon after, boasting a library of 6 whole games that hit the stores at the same time as the console itself. All of these games amounted to underwhelming derivatives of popular arcade titles, without even offering the weird and inventive gameplay twists you found on Epoch systems. To their credit though, Gakken did actually license 2 games from Konami, bringing the world the worst ever conversions of Frogger and Super Cobra. It's hard to hate the TV Boy though. The console is just so damn weird, you can't help but admire it. And its tiny library does have the most consistent and compelling packaging of perhaps any game system ever. Tidy silver foil squares with vibrant artwork arranged at a lively 45-degree skew, and an orderly numeric catalog system, all of which creates a sense of order for this short-lived chaos. It's not a great system, or even a good one, but it existed, and by God, I'm going to talk about it. What could be more fitting as the first release for Gakken Boy? And by first I mean the game to bear the number 1 on its box, despite coming out seemingly at the same time as all 5 other games, than Excite Invader. If your first thought upon hearing this name was, oh, I bet that's a Space Invaders clone, then give yourself no prize because, yes, obviously. I mean, what else could it be? Congratulations on figuring out the obvious. Yes, Excite Invader is yet another in the endless succession of games attempting to chomp a bite off the success of Taito's immense arcade hit. You control a little guy who shoots at a formation of invaders that marches parallel to your position and jumps a little closer every time it hits the edge of the screen. You need to gun them down while dodging their fire, ducking behind shields, and taking potshots at a roving bonus ship that flits around at the rear of the formation. Destroy all the invaders and you move along to the next round. Standard fare. Excite Invader does a few things to set itself apart from factory-issue invaders. For starters, it rotates the field of play by 90 degrees in order to take better advantage of the Yoko format of home television screens, versus the Tate arrangement of arcade monitors. Similar to how Atari's Breakout laid sideways for Atari 2600 in order to give players a roomier field of play. I'm sure this isn't the only invaders alike to have adopted this tactic, but I am by no means an invaders clone scholar. And it's certainly not something that I've seen on a regular basis. The horizontal rotation also allows the invaders here to move in a more precise fashion than they would otherwise, since the TV Boy has much greater vertical pixel resolution than horizontal. Other items of note: the bonus saucer takes a more active role in the action than usual in games like this, firing toward the player with a faster, more frequent beam than the invaders in formation use. Destroying the saucer nets you hefty bonus points, but also causes the saucer to respawn immediately, so it doesn't really buy you a reprieve. In another feature somewhat unique to Excite Invader, the missile-based barriers, or in this case, missile guy barriers, block very nearly the entire player's space, rather than standing as individual blocks. However, it only takes a single shot to break through them, providing you with very little cover. And, well, that's about it. Excite Invader does not exactly revolutionize the format. I suppose it makes sense as a lead title for a new console in Japan, given the fact that Japan's perspective on video games tends to drop a pin in Space Invaders as the starting point for the country's video games industry. But the original Invaders was 5 years old by this point, and the fabled Invaders craze had long given way to subsequent obsessions. On the other hand, SG-1000 and Famicom wouldn't see official ports of Space Invaders until 1985, so I guess Excite Invader did have something to offer the kids, provided those kids could get past the meager visuals and audio. Next time on NES Works Gaiden, the Gakkens will continue until morale improves.